1-800-259-9231 if you'd like to talk to Dr. Rand Paul, son of Ron Paul, running for U.S. Senate out of Kentucky. I think destiny is he's going to run. I'll be very surprised if he doesn't. But he said the next 2 weeks you'll hear the main announcement. Dr. Rand Paul, let's go over the most important issues right now. I was asking you during the break what you think is most important, and you made the point that they did it. That the private Federal Reserve made this debt. They created this system, and you went back to Andrew Jackson. Go over that.
Well, the interesting thing is that I think the two are always linked, and particularly when people try to sort of make us outside the mainstream about talking about the Fed, is I say the Fed is the debt. The way we pay for the debt is by monetizing it, printing new money, and they go hand in hand. Because we have a large debt, we give up a lot of control and power to the Federal Reserve that we wouldn't have to do if we didn't run a large debt. So they're two sides of the same coin. In fact, when Andrew Jackson ran hard against the second bank, he said the national debt is not a national blessing but a national curse, inasmuch it is calculated to gather around the administration a moneyed aristocracy keen and dangerous to the republic. And I think that's really important, that it is the debt, but it's also the Federal Reserve, and they're two sides of the same coin.
Well, really, the fight against the private offshore central banks has been the perpetual fight since before this country was even born, from the moment it was conceived, right through the 7 years of revolutionary conflict against the British Crown until today. And I guess they won the beachhead in 1913 and have been strangling us and using us as their engine for world domination ever since. And I believe they've overreached now in their greediness to sacrifice the United States and run up our national credit card to fund their global operations, in their own words, and that they've overreached. I mean, inexorably, we feel the momentum shift against them as now the general public knows the Federal Reserve's private. They know it's above the law. They know it's criminal. And now it's not just your father getting in the face of Bernanke or Greenspan. Now it's the majority of the congressmen and senators. Now it's the pundits. These guys are more and more on the run, and we feel the momentum, the pendulum, shifting directions. Do you see that? Do you feel that, Dr. Paul?
Yeah, I think one of the most amazing things, and one thing we can take great solace in after this election, is that the last time Bernanke was on with my father in the committee, you can truly see fear in his eyes. They are afraid that there will be oversight of the Federal Reserve, the first major oversight or change in the legislation since it originated in 1913, and they fear it. They've hired $1 million lobbyist. The lobbyist that used to be the lobbyist for Enron is now going to be the lobbyist for the Fed, and they are fearful that they are losing the momentum and there could actually be a real audit.
They're going to pull out every stop, though. They're openly threatened Congress, as you know, with physical martial law last October. We had the congressman here on air. People couldn't believe it. And now they're writing articles going, yes, no, there will be martial law if you don't do whatever we say. And if you ever audit the Fed, there's going to be a depression. So, I mean, this is literally a gun to our head saying if you ask too many questions, bang, your economy's dead. Is that not financial terrorism, Dr. Paul?
Well, they're also threatening. They say, if you audit the Fed, that will raise interest rates. Well, looking at the numbers and transparency does nothing to the interest rates or even really to their policy. Well, we want them not to have this expansionist policy of easy credit and easy money and low interest rates. Just looking at their books does nothing to change their policy. So an audit's a good first step, but they're already complaining, saying an audit will control their monetary policy. And I wish it were so, but the audit's only the first step forward. But you can see how they truly fear transparency. And, the fact that they bought up $2 trillion worth of assets, the biggest thing we need to get out now, though, is that the debt used to be backed by Treasury bills, and the Federal Reserve bought Treasury bills, but now the Federal Reserve buys used car loans. The Federal Reserve buys bad home loans. So there's all kinds of things being monetized now. I think I saw a statistic that 40% of the debt being bought now by the Federal Reserve is not Treasury bills or Treasury bonds. It is used car loans and bad home mortgages and derivatives and all this other craziness.
Well, that's what's scary, is that they've made a big show of paying back a few $100 billion of the trillions that have disappeared into, in many cases, completely foreign banks, not just offshore, multinational. But what they're not explaining is they're taking that money and fractional reserving it, loaning at least 10 times out and leveraging it into derivatives again. So it's just pumping up the bubble even bigger at the cost of the real economy.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And if you look at the monetary base, this is the banking reserves plus the currency. The banking reserves last year doubled. And that's what you're talking about. That then goes into the banks and can be multiplied another tenfold. So we doubled the banking reserves, and then when it gets into the system and spreads through the economy, it can be multiplied another tenfold. I think there's no question that ultimately we will be seeing, rampant inflation. And that's what I tell people in this election. I tell the Republicans, I say, look, you want someone like me who can directly draw the debt and say how debt hurts the working class and debt hurts those on fixed incomes, because that's the Democrats usually say, oh, we'll give a handout to those people, and that way we can buy their votes. But I think we have a message, too, that appeals to people. We say, look, the debt causes inflation. High prices hurt those who are least able to afford the rising prices, and we're going to help you. We're going to help you not by giving you a handout. We're going to help you by limiting the debt and correcting inflation.
Well, Dr. Paul, look at the system these bankers create worldwide, a system of dependency, a system of bankrupting societies, creating debt bubbles so big that when they implode, it's a black hole. There's no way to physically pay it back, creating fiat currency and liquidity at many multiples above all the real resources and actual assets in the world. And then they destroy the economy so bad, their argument is, well, you've got to give 90% of your taxes to us in interest on the debt, but we'll give you the 10% in government jobs and government contracts to corporations into welfare. So they give us the crumbs off the table. That's what we've got to explain to the poor people is this is a scam. Of the $23.7 trillion Bloomberg and AP report they've stolen in 10 months, 23+ trillion. You're talking about a few $100 billion of chicken feed that's been actually given to domestic population. So this isn't even really socialism when Newsweek has that headline saying we're all socialists now. Isn't this more akin to fascism?
Well, exactly right. And then you look at, in one of the most galling and glaring episodes, we gave AIG $180 billion, and then we also gave most of their multi-millionaire executives, we gave them retention bonuses for doing such a great job with their company. I think that kind of thing really galls the public. And the interesting thing in a Republican primary is that I haven't seen good statistics on this, but I can tell you from being out on the stump for 3 or 4 months, 80 to 90% or more Republican primary voters are against the bank bailout. I'll bet you 60 to 70% of Democrats are against it. So as I go around Kentucky, I say, look, I would have voted against this bailout. I've been talking about it for almost a year now, and you get to choose. You get to choose a Republican to be your nominee, and do you want somebody who voted for the bailout? Over half the Republican leadership did, and you've got to decide which direction your party takes. And I think the message is resonating. I worried at first that Republicans would be upset to hear some chastisement of their people, but I think most of them, 2/3 of them were voting against McCain as their nominee. So quite a few Republicans are more conservative than what they're getting out of Washington.
Well, look at Rick Perry and other governors who are clearly globalist. They've been jumping on the bandwagon, talking about secession and fight the New World Order. It's like they're Alex Jones or something. and that's great for me because it makes me mainstream, and suddenly all these big stations are turning us on in major cities because everything I've talked about has now come true. But really, they're only paying lip service. We need real McCoys like Ron Paul and Rand Paul and others who actually have a record and who have spent their whole lives voting and speaking and fighting for true freedom. And so now is the time for people to support folks like yourself. What can people do now? I mean, obviously, once you announce in 2 weeks, the real momentum will kick in. What can they do today to make sure you make that right decision to run for Senate out of Kentucky?
Well, I told you earlier, Alex, last time I was on your show, your listeners shut down my website because they overdid it. We had to buy a bigger server. So we want your listeners to go and test out my website to see if they can overtax it. That's RandPaul2010.com. The other thing they can do is we're taking pledges for a money bomb, and that website is runrandrun.com, and we're hoping to get 10,000 people that would give $100 on one day. If we raise $1 million in one day, which I think it's possible, if we did that, it completely transforms my race. It completely makes us really the lead dog in the race and makes us the one to beat. It puts us on the map for the rest of the election. We don't have to struggle month in and month out to see if they'll still include us because of our fundraising. We get all that front end loaded on August 20th.
Absolutely.
Amazing what we could do.
And then that makes the media say, oh, Rand Paul would be great, and his dad's, really popular, but he can't raise that type of money. That makes you a major contender and makes Kentucky media pay attention to you, and then it's a multiplier. You get $1 million, you get $20 million in free coverage in Kentucky.